to Women Who Write Bad, a session of people who like to kill people in their free time. And I would like to start by introducing our panelists this afternoon. It's going to be sort of a wide-ranging discussion on everything from just what it's like to do research on killing people, what it's like to be a female writer, what it's like to have, you know, a lot of female protagonists on this panel. So we'll dig right in. I'll start by introducing Kara Block. Kara is the New York Times and USA best-selling author of 14 books that are about the private investigator Amy Leduc. Did I get the French pronunciation correct? Thank you. Which is set in Paris. Kara has received multiple nominations for the Anthony and Macavity Awards and was a Washington Post Book World Book of the Year citation. She has more than 400,000 books in print and has been translated into German, Norwegian, Japanese, French, Spanish, Italian, and Hebrew. She, as part of her research for her books, she's been to Paris many, many times, including once being locked in a bathroom at the Victor Hugo Museum, which is just like her hero, Amy. Kara, can you tell me a little bit about Amy?
Yes, Martha, she's taller and thinner than I am, and she wears heels. She's a fashionista. She's also half French and half American, and she inherited a detective agency from her father, who was killed in a mysterious bomb explosion, and it's based on the Rue du Loup detective, which is in Paris at the same address.
Very nice. Lisa Brackman, who's right here. Lisa's the critically acclaimed New York Times bestselling author of the Ellie Stone Mysteries.
No.
Ellie, oh, that's right, I'm sorry.
James, this is.
Oh gosh, I'm so sorry, the wrong Ellie.
Wrong Ellie, yeah. Mine was, no, never
Yours
mind.
was first.
Mine was first.
I'm sorry, Ellie
McEnroe.
McEnroe. My apologies, I just wrote that down. The latest Dragon Day was the Seattle Times Top 10 Mystery of 2015 and was shortlisted for the Lefty Award. Her next novel is Go Between, to be published in July of 2016, and she has a galley of it. Her works have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Travel and Leisure, and CNET. She lives in San Diego with a couple of cats, far too many books, and a bass ukulele. Which, was that a holdover from your punk rock days?
I wasn't exactly a punk rocker, more of the sort of new wave, Chrissie Hynde, Talking Heads school of rock.
Yes.
Yeah. But no, it's not. I wish I'd had it then. My bass back then was a Fender Jazz bass.
Oh, whoa.
And your Ellie McEnroe, I got it right, McEnroe novels are set in China. Can you tell us a little bit more about Ellie?
Ellie is an accidental Iraq war vet with a bum leg and a worse attitude, and a slight addiction to Percocet. Yeah, Ellie's the kind of person who is constantly getting into situations that are above her pay grade. Because face it, if she did not, there would be no books. So yes, she is trying to make a life for herself in Beijing, representing contemporary Chinese artists, and gets into a lot of trouble.
Nice. Our next panelist is Kati Kapelta, and she is in fact a punk rocker, as well as a writer and a performance artist. Her debut, The Hummingbird, was published in Finland in 2013, and the sequel, The Defenseless, was published in 2014. The Hummingbird was shortlisted for the Petrona Award. The Defenseless won the prize for Best Finnish Crime Novel of 2014 and was one of the top 10 best-selling books in Finland. Kati's heroes, who's a senior constable, Anna Fakata, works hard to get justice for immigrants. Tell us a little bit more about her.
She's immigrant herself. She's a refugee from ex-Yugoslavia. She fled the Yugoslavian wars when she was a child. She came with her family to Finland, and then she studied there, and she is a police officer now, and she lives in northern town in Finland and works there, and she is feeling outsider because of her immigrant background. She's not she is quite well adjusted to the society and so on, but still she feels always a little bit alien or outsider and thinks a lot that where do I belong and where is my home, and she also suffers a little bit like she's losing her mother tongue slowly because she's speaking all the time Finnish, and I think she's quite cool sometimes. Sometimes she's really annoying too. I don't know if any of you were in other panels I did done here. Maybe some of them. So maybe you hear my jokes again. But anyway, I'm thinking that I'm going to put her into therapy in my next book.
I think all of our heroes could really do with a little bit of therapy, except possibly Terry Shames or Samuel Craddock. Her first Samuel Craddock novel, A Killing in Cotton Hill, was named one of the top 5 debut mystery novels of 2013 by Mystery People. The second in the series, The Last Death of Jack Harbin, was named one of the top 5 mysteries of 2014 by the Library Association's Library Journal. Dead Brook and Jarrett Creek, the third of the Samuel Craddock series, came out in October of 2014, followed by A Deadly Affair at Bobtail Ridge in April 2015, and The Necessary Murder of Nomi Blake in January 2016. Terry, if you don't know, is really lazy.
Oh, yeah.
So tell me a little bit about Samuel Craddock, your hero, the only male hero on this panel.
I do write in the voice of Samuel Craddock. He comes from my grandfather, although my sister said our grandfather was not that nice. My grandfather and I had a great bond, and when I decided to write something that I really came from my heart, I decided that I wanted to make him the hero of this book, set in a small town in Texas that's based on a town that has been all over the news in the past week because there have been terrific floods in the area. So that's been sort of on my mind. Samuel, another thing I really wanted to do is that I got tired of reading in every crime novel that, about the 60-something person who was decrepit and completely, with one foot in the grave, and I said, I'm gonna make this man vital. And I get so many letters from people saying, I'm so glad he's vital. And my favorite thing that I got recently about him was from a man who said, your books are so wholesome. And he was a minister in North Carolina, and I said, does he realize I'm writing about murder?
Well, and I'm NP Cooley. My name is Martha Cooley, but there's actually another author named Martha Cooley, which is why I took the long crime novel tradition of going by my initials. My first book, Ice Shear, was published in 2014 and was one of Oprah's best books of summer 2014. And its sequel, Flame Out, came out last spring. There's also a prequel, if you like ebooks, and I'm working on the 4th novel in this series, Savage Gods. And they all deal with my hero, June Lyons, who's a former FBI agent who has become a small town cop. And in the book I'm working right now, rejoins the FBI. So she's got the back and forth there, but which is a whole new set of challenges. But all of us have heroes who have faced our challenges. And it sort of relates to what Terry was talking about. I'd just like a really quick poll. I'm going to ask a question about whether you prefer your heroes as straight up good heroes or if you prefer the gray heroes. So those who prefer straight up good heroes, please raise your hand. I'll ask those who prefer their heroes with a shade of gray. Okay. So we have several. I think we're sort of split here, although Amy sort of walks the line between gray and dark. But certainly, Lisa and Kati, you have really heroes that are more anti-heroes than heroes. What sort of made you decide to write a hero that was, shades of gray, or alternatively, straight up good? So Lisa, do you want to start?
Sure. I think because I find that heroes that are vulnerable, that have their own struggles, you know, they're just more interesting for me to write. You know, when you have a main character, in the case of Ellie, and part of the question of the book is she going to survive her own self-destructive nature? It just adds an extra dimension to me, to the plot and to the suspense, because she's not just fighting against whatever antagonist she's up against, she's fighting against herself and trying to come to terms with, you know, why she is the way she is, who she is it possible for her to be happy? And I just find those are really interesting questions. The heroine of my second and fifth book, the one that's coming out, it also is an untraditional heroine in that sense, who went from being very naive and completely over her head and, you know, dealing with a situation that was completely outside of her experience, to becoming very cynical and a lot more savvy. But she definitely is on the gray side of the law. I mean, I think she's a good guy, but is she? I don't know.
And now for counterpoint, we'll have Terry.
Yeah.
I write about social issues, and Samuel is a man who feels a sense of responsibility about his town. He feels that it's important that he keeps the order in town, and he feels a sense of understanding about why people do bad things. And what I'm interested in is a person who is the normal person who suddenly feels that the only way to continue their life the way it has always been is to kill someone and get them out of the way. They think that will solve everything, and of course that's not true. And my feeling is that that's a very good way of talking about the issues that we all face, of how to save face, how to be a good person, how to keep family secrets that have always been important to us, how to keep things even in our own lives, and then the person who just can't quite do it without, like the person who has some kind of addiction and wants to keep it hidden from people. And Samuel feels a sense of responsibility to keep the community, but he also understands people's bad side. And so sometimes it's very hard for him. He knows he has to arrest someone that he really cares for, and he has to do it anyway. So that's what makes him a good guy, but it also makes him conflicted often. Yeah, that's it.
Kati, how about you?
I've been thinking about this, that is Anna actually a hero or anti-hero, because I think she's like both. She is strong but vulnerable at the same time. And why did I make such a character? To be honest, I don't know where she came from. She wasn't very planned before I started to write. But I think we all have these shades of grey. We all have our pains and aches and maybe even some dark sides and some secrets, and that's life. That's human. That's how we are, and it's interesting. I mean, who would like to read about a character who is completely like normal? Like nobody is. And I
Look
forgot
at the
to-
air quotes.
yeah, and I forgot to say that Anna is actually she's from Yugoslavia, but she's Hungarian. From there, there's a big Hungarian minority living in Serbia, and all Hungarian surrounding countries of Hungary, and she belonged to minority when she was child, and she's now also belongs to minority, and that's also what makes her a very interesting character to me, to observe Finnish society through the eyes of outsider. And the name, the name Fakata, it's very common Hungarian family name, but it means black. So there is noir in her name too.
Kara, your hero, Amy LeDuc, she has a dark past. She has connections to the Holocaust, and certainly the way she navigates life is not just always on the straight and narrow. But she's very much a Parisian. And at some point, or I've heard you say that your books avoid the baguette Paris. Although thankfully they still have the excellent shoe Paris.
Very important.
Yes.
How did you pick your location, and how did that dictate both, who the hero you chose as well as the crimes you write?
Yeah. Well, of course, shoes are a big part of her life because she's wearing stilettos and running over the cobbles. And it's true, I have a friend who does that, so I've seen it, witnessed. But she's, half American. Her American mother abandoned her when she was 8 years old, she became a member of the radical European group based on Baader Meinhof, if you remember, in the 70s and 80s. Her mother went down the dark side. We don't really know what happened. She was sort of raised by her father, was a French policeman at the time, and it was sort of like an elephant in the room. But, and her father was killed, murdered, so she has this great distrust of the French police. I mean, the old boys network. And there's a lot of things that go on. But the Paris that I was seeing when I was there in the 70s, 80s, and a lot in the 90s, and even today, is not the baguette and beret stereotype. It's the Paris I see when I stay with my friends. It's the immigrant Paris. It's the Paris off the side streets. It's the Paris where they had the shootings last November, which you would never think it would happen there. The old working class enclave, the places that are that you just don't see on a tourist bus. And that's where my friends live. That's what opens my eyes to another part of Paris. It's intensely Parisian. They're just not, wearing Chanel. And that's what I wanted to write about in the stories. The Parisian the immigrants now in Paris are different from the immigrants, 20, 30 years ago. Paris has gone through these successive waves. In the Marais, it used to be an old Jewish ghetto, but now it's super trendy and gentrified. So it's, poor people don't live there anymore. They can't afford it. But it's a Paris that seems real to me. It seems what I see. And when I wrote Murder in Belleville, my second book, which is set in what used to be a very Arab quarter, my friend said, I said, how can I write about your neighborhood? And she said, just go down to the boulevard on Market Day, which is huge, and write down everything you see. So I sat outside in an outdoor cafe, I drank mint tea, I wrote everything down that I saw in my notebook. And that's the only paragraph I've ever written in all these books that went into the book that same way. I wrote exactly what I saw. And that's what I love to do.
How about you, Terry? How did you capture your Texas? And again, what is it specifically Texas crime you're writing about, or?
I get emails from all over the country from people saying this could be my small town. And I think even in big cities, people live in small towns. People live in the little area where they are, and you get to know people right where you live, even if you live in San Francisco or LA. My son lives in LA. He basically bounces between where he lives and where he works, and that's the things he knows. It's a small town for him. I think that none of us can ever really get rid of our roots. And I've read about many writers that they feel like when they really start writing what they love, they go back to their roots. And I never wanted to live in Texas. I hate the weather there. From the time I was a child, I said I will never live here. But I loved going to the small town where my grandparents lived. And when I started to write something that I thought would be a good book, I was there, and when I go back there, it's as if I am walking right into it. I made it fictionalized because it lives in my. I think we all glorify our pasts in some way and romanticize it in a way for good or bad. Romantic can be romantic, making things look worse than they did and better than they did. And for me, I feel like this is a part of my past that I can smell the Texas town. I can feel it. I know what the dirt looks like. I know how the air feels. I know it so intimately. It's in my heart. And then when I start to write, it just pours out. That's what I have is the setting that's really part of me.
Lisa, how about you? Your hero is not from China. She is an expat, but she, you have her really deep in the streets and back streets of the places she lives. Tell me a little bit about how you set her there.
Well, I found myself at a young age, 20 years old, in China shortly after the Cultural Revolution, and I was there for about 6 months, and that had quite an impact on me. And I started going back to China. I went back in '93, and then I started going back every year beginning in 1999 because I was interested in learning the Mandarin that I was too undisciplined to study much of when I was there the first time. So I did that, and you know, all of this time I'd also been a writer, and but not really seriously pursuing writing for publication. And when it came down to finally, you know, if you want to do this, you really need to focus and get serious. So I'm like, okay, well, what can I write about that might be interesting to people? And I thought, you know, contemporary China at the time, I wrote the first Ellie book in 2007, I think, mostly, and most of what you saw from Western writers in China were period pieces. And you know, foot binding and tragedy, I call them sometimes. And I didn't see a lot, I know that's not really very nice. I didn't see a lot of what I was seeing in contemporary China, in the cities in particular, you know, which change in an eye blink. I mean, when I was copy editing Rock, Paper, Tiger, I had to change details as it was being copy edited because, oh, they know that taxi company is no longer allowed to operate in Beijing. Oh, there's a new subway line. Oh, there's this, oh, there's that. It's just a very interesting place. And at the same time, I've always been very careful. I don't want to make it exotic. I mean, you know, it's exotic to those of us that don't know it. It's not exotic to the people that get up every morning and go to work, you know, living in Beijing and are living their lives. So I think my guiding philosophy with writing any particular setting is to look for the ordinary and the exotic and the exotic and the ordinary. You know, the book I'm working on now is set in my hometown, San Diego, and I'm trying to take the same kind of, you know, because you tell people you're from California when you're traveling around the world, and man, it's like, that is exotic to much of the rest of the world. So you want to kind of get both perspectives across in your writing. You have to keep it focused on how your character sees it, and Ellie's an outsider, so she is going to have some of that outsider's perspective. But, you know, if I'm writing a character who's a native Californian who's, you know, operating in California, they're going to see things in a completely different way. So.
Can I just say one thing? I have never been to China, and when I read the first book that Lisa wrote, I felt like I had been there, not only been there, but chased through the streets of there. You really do a wonderful job of putting me there. I guess it's the way it is, because it sure feels like it.
Well, I thank you. I will say, like I also have to say about Puerto Vallarta, which was where I set my second book, Beijing, especially for a foreign woman, for women in general, is one of the safest places you can ever travel. I have traveled all over China. I've been to more places than I can count, and I can only think of one or two times where I went, yeah, maybe not the best idea I ever had. Most of the time, it really is safe. And you always have to deal with that when you're writing crime fiction, is like, yeah, you know, who is it, Yrsa? Sigurd's daughter is saying, you know, she writes mysteries set in Iceland. Nobody dies in Iceland. There are like 2 murders a year.
I think this is one of the biggest reasons why crime fiction is so popular and people love to read it. That when we read crime fiction, we are like somehow in the between of the entertainment and also widening our knowledge about the world and cultures and almost whatever, like everything is there. And
that was actually going to be one of the questions. Why did you decide to write crime fiction? We can, if you want to expand on what you were saying.
I didn't decide it. It was just a sudden idea. I live in an island in North Finland, and I was coming from the mainland from work. I was sitting in my car on the ferry, and I just got the idea, oh, it would be so cool to write a crime novel. And I wanted that my main character is an immigrant woman, Polish woman. And this is how it started, and it didn't leave me, this idea didn't leave me alone. And then I had to take a Sabbath year from my work and do it. And of course I wanted to write, before that I knew that I want to write, I want to be a writer, but I didn't think about crime writing. So it was kind of I don't know, mysterious accident. But nice, very nice one. I love it. I love to write crime and cool.
I discovered her books last year and through an English blog, and I read them, and it was so interesting because she is an outsider, and she becomes a policewoman, which is this whole other look. But a good police officer has to be on the outside, right, looking in and picking up details, and an outsider. And I was just fascinated, and I felt like I was there with her in those terrible projects where her brother lives.
Well, let me talk about crime fiction. The first book I wrote came out a few years ago, and at my first audience, which is not as big as this, someone raised his hand and said, "Did you write crime fiction because you feel like you're not good enough to write mainstream fiction?"
Oh.
And I said, I think that the crime novel is an excellent way to write really important things. And if you write well, that makes it work. And one of my first reviews said, the literary quality of the writing will draw you in. I think that it is not; these things are not necessarily what's the word? Mutually exclusive. And so I chose it as a way of talking about what I think is important things that people keep hidden inside themselves, things that communities keep hidden, things that are understood but not necessarily part of the best parts of us. So that's why I chose to write crime fiction.
Kara, how about you?
Well, I have a new book coming out in 6 days, and it's actually a prequel to the whole series. So it goes back to 1989. Remember when we had pagers? Okay, we had big hair, shoulder pads, Duran Duran. Okay. My detail in the French version, she's the Duran Duran and still, but the B-52s. But she is in med school. So I've written a whole series of books, and she's just had a baby, and now we go back to her sort of younger, wilder days, and how did she really become a detective? That really forced me to think, why would this young woman who became a computer security expert, get pulled into crime so much in so many different parts of Paris? And I got to explore kind of the origins of why I did write crime, and it's a great vehicle. I'm not personally, I don't read things with gratuitous violence. I don't enjoy that. I think, of course, you're killing someone, but I don't think it has to be as explicit on the page. To me, it's about something incredibly tragic happens to a character. It doesn't just happen to that character. It happens to the investigator who investigates that crime. They're affected, to the family members, to the people who live in their environment. It's more to me about what happens and how it ripples through different parts of society. Something tragic happened, a car accident, a murder. Everything has changed. And I'm really fascinated about that. So some major event, that really pulls me in. And in Paris, there's so many wonderful courtyards to, just kill people and pull the body. Very important these days, body placement. Corpse.
Lisa, how about you?
Well, first, I really want to, what Kara said really expressed something that I feel strongly as well. I mean, I think, violence and sex in books, you want it to be clear, you want it to have impact. It's, gratuitous just means it's on the page and it's not moving the story or advancing the characters. So I don't mind writing an explicit sex scene or something very violent if it actually has a point. And I think it was why I never liked those CSI shows, because they're just kind of violence porn. To me, as opposed to something which really deals with the very real impact that this kind of violent death has on families for years and in communities. And I think that's really important. Personally, I write more suspense fiction than murder mysteries, although the third and maybe final Ellie book is more of a traditional murder mystery in many ways. And you can say a lot of the same things about suspense fiction that you can about crime fiction. It's an opportunity to deal with larger issues if you're interested in that. And I am. So the book I have coming out is very much deals with the war on crime, the American prison industry, marijuana legalization, all kinds of really fun stuff, dark money in politics, and it just gives you an excuse to play with those kinds of issues. And I've always been a very, I'll admit it, I'm a political person, and this is my way of engaging with politics.
Well, actually, I'm going to pick up on that last point there for a moment. You describe, or in one of your recent books, you described it as a lighthearted romp through an environmental apocalypse.
Yeah.
And your books have a strong social justice element. And how did you sort of balance? I mean, at the end of the day, we're writing entertainment, but at the same time, we want to write things that raise conscience. How did you come to balance that?
Well, the first thing is that any kind of issue that you have in your book has to be embedded in the bones of the story, and you cannot stop and say on page 73 for a lengthy essay on the dangers of, global warming. I don't know, whatever it is that you're dealing with. I'm not writing essays, I'm not writing nonfiction, I'm writing fiction. So whatever it is, I always think of these things as, it's like icebergs. It's the same way I approach research. Most of it you're never going to see. There's just going to be a little tiny bit that's poking up above the surface, but everything that's underneath, I hope, is informing the story. And you really have to make it about the characters. You have to make it about the characters' responses to situations. You have to be very careful that your characters aren't representing some kind of didactic point of view rather than being people who are engaging with whatever problems that they have to deal with. And I also, I can't help it. I tend to have a humor in my books. I don't know if it's always obvious. I'm not sure that it is sometimes. But, I crack myself up, and I think that really helps, especially like that was an environmental, the environmental situation in China is really pretty dire, if any of you were familiar with it. And it's depressing. It's really sad. You're going like, 75% of the rivers are effectively dead, and the air, the lead in these areas where they're recycling computers it's so bad that they have to bring water in. You can't drink any of the water. That you can't even measure how many toxins are in the ground. If you can't bring some humor to that, you're going to depress your audience, and I'd be too depressed to write about it.
Kati, you also are dealing with some very serious issues with the immigrant populations in Europe. But at the same time, your book is a thriller. Your book is straight up page turner. Again, how did you balance that?
Well, I think it comes. I want to tell stories, and that's, I think it's the key. I'm not a preacher or documenter or lecturing or anything like that. I want to tell stories about people, about crime, and also these themes. They are part of the story, and I don't know. Again, I say I don't know how I do it. I just do it. It's my punk attitude to everything. Really, I don't much analyze my writing and my work. So this is a very interesting question. How do I balance it? Well, I think it's the characters and the storytelling. Just they make it to be entertaining too.
Carrie, how about you? You've dealt with veterans returning home. You've dealt with a lot of different things as well.
Yes, I have dealt with several issues in my books, and I think that the word entertainment is sort of overrated. I want my readers to be engaged. I want them to really have a strong feeling for what they're reading about and be carried along by the story and get involved with the characters. If that's entertaining, that's fine. But to me, I couldn't write it if I didn't have some sense of the importance of what I'm writing about, or the important. That sounds like a self-important word. But what I mean is something that is more than just a throwaway. I want to write about things that are real to people, that are real, of real concern. My second book is very minimally about the way veterans are treated when they come back to this country. I mean, from being in foreign wars, or the way they're treated, I think is abysmal. And so I didn't want to write some tract about that. I wanted to just embed it in part of the story, and I hope that that comes through. I just, Wednesday, Celebrate With Me, sent off to my editor my 6th book. It is set in 1982 and is concerned with race relations in Texas. And I really enjoyed writing it. I felt as if it was such a good book, such a ripe subject for now as well as for then. And trying to talk about it without being, I didn't want it to be overly inflammatory, and I also didn't want to downplay it. So I needed to have that balance. It was a really, I don't want to say it was fun, but it was a really engaging story to write. So that's to me what I like to write about. Yeah.
And Kara, I know you've sort of woven a lot of these things through your work, but I'm interested in, and I'm going to ask all of you, research. I mean, you talked a little bit about sitting at the table and just watching the world go by. But do you have is there any particular bit of research you were especially proud of digging out, and how did you use it in your work?
Impersonating a New York Times reporter was one of my better clues, but shh. But I will say that I do go to Paris usually twice a year. I couch surf, I stay with my friends, I meet police, I meet private detectives, I hang out with cafe owners, I talk to bus drivers, anyone who'll talk to me, really. I will just kind of go into the area and really try to, I like to try to embed myself in that quartier and kind of see what it's like, in the morning when they're sweeping the gutters.
I'm saying to myself, why did I set my books in Texas? Why did I set them in Paris?
Right, Paris, next time, yeah, I know, Nice. But it's about feeling that. At 5:30 when the children get out of school and they're going to the bakeries and, the boulangerie and they get the pain au chocolat, and 7:30 when father comes home and has the apéro. You want to get the pulse of the quartier, and you do that in every kind of way, every kind of sense. But I do go to the archives, I go to the libraries, I find old phone books, I do everything. But the thing with the New York, sometimes I pretend to be someone else. And I just kind of speak quickly and go, like this, and I had an appointment, why isn't he here? Please show me, And if you act really officious, they kind of listen to you, because that's how you get around. Or I know this man, and so you get to meet people. And in France, maybe many places, it's introductions. Oh, I know this person, and my friend's father who's a dentist, his brother-in-law, okay, you can meet him. So I have gotten into the Paris prefecture, which is 36 Quai des Orfèvres, where Inspector Maigret had his office in the Georges Simenon novels. It is the Paris head police quarters. I've gotten into the Brigade Criminelle, which is the elite homicide squad. I've gotten up on the roof. Nothing beats that view in the middle of the Seine, right across. I've gone in the laboratory, well, it's an attic, where they have hangers and they hang the bloody clothes from crime scenes. Seriously, in an attic. And they have skylights and they have a door. And he was like, I'm going to take you in there. And I go, are you sure it's okay? Because what if the wind blows and my DNA or my hair goes all bloody, right?
You would be convicted of the murder.
Right. Yeah, that was, couldn't find the key, thank God. But yeah, I don't know. But we all think like that, I think, nowadays. But yes, and I get to do fun stuff like that. I go in the sewers, I've gone with people who are kind of have parties down there and met the rats. There's a lot of them. And, but yeah, it's quite amazing. There's a whole world under there. There are the quarries, there's the sewers, and people like to go down and party. And they show movies down there. Seriously. There's a whole world under there on the weekends.
Are these college students?
Some of them.
Yes.
Some of them are not. And of course I use that in a book because it was so, why couldn't I use that in a book? So I have to go there, as I tell my husband, I have to go to Paris and research.
How about you, Terry? I know like me, you write law enforcement. Is there any sort of research you've done?
Well, I did. my way of researching, I'm also writing a thriller right now that's a completely different kind of thing. And my way of researching is I write it all and then I look and I put little marks and say, is this true? So I go back and research it. And it's amazing how often it really is true. But in the first book, law enforcement in Texas is very much like law enforcement in Italy. You have these layers of law enforcement and you don't know exactly what each of them does. So I had researched and found that in small towns in Texas, it's usually the highway patrol that investigates. So I happened to be in Texas and I talked to a 25-year veteran of a police force, and I said, this is the way I understand it. He said, that's the way it is on paper, but in actuality, it's the Texas Rangers, because they have unlimited resources, which I thought, wow, unlimited resources. And that's easy to play with. Now, the other thing is that I also had put Samuel Craddock in the first book, or the second or third book, is appointed to be the chief of police and the head of the Sheriff's Association of the United States, who reviewed my book. They said he never reviews books, but he loved it. And he said, but that would never happen. He would never be appointed. And I said, oh, I beg your pardon. He would be in Texas. And he came back and I guess he did his own research and he said, oh, mea culpa, you're right. So yeah, that's the kind of research I do. Not any in-depth, I know this subject.
Conti, I know you have a master's degree that examined racist bullying in schools, and I know you worked in schools for a long time. Did any of that inform what you were doing, or did you do other types of research?
That influenced a lot. I was just about to tell about this master thesis and teaching. I'm a special education teacher by profession, and I was teaching refugee children in Finland, and of course I use a lot of that material, what I have seen, what I have studied, what I have done, and everything. But of course I didn't know about police work, like almost nothing. I started to write The Hummingbird. I thought that I don't have to do any research. I write but quite quickly I noticed that it's not going to work. And I had to contact the local police. Well, we don't have police on the island, but they're nearby town. There is a police station. I contacted them and they said, oh, welcome. And so I got one police officer who is now my regular informant. And also if I need to know something special, like for example, in the defenseless, there is a gang thing, like a very violent drug criminal gang spreading from Sweden and Denmark to Finland. So I found a police officer from Helsinki who is specialized to gang issues, and I introduced him. And then, of course, if I need to know about something about the crime scene investigation and stuff like that, also the pathologist,
Pathologist.
Pathologist.
I have a contact with them, and it's mostly like interviewing people and also learning the laws of police work. So we all know that it's very regulated. There are many laws of what police officers can do and what they cannot do and so on. But I think the most interesting research, and I also lived in Serbia myself, in the Hungarian part of Serbia, in the town where my main character is from. So I also use this knowledge, and I can speak fluent Hungarian and so on. And I go to Serbia also regularly, like once a year maybe. And my third book, The Exiled, which is now out in Finland and coming out in October in English, it is set in Serbia. Anna goes there for summer holiday and something happens there, and I went there actually 3 times to research for this book. I wanted to interview a police officer, but they didn't want to. They always said yeah, but nobody appeared. And it was so hard. Like in Finland, everybody was immediately like, yeah, I will tell you everything, but these were, no, nothing. And it was really the third time I went there, I finally, because I have a friend who is a lawyer, and he somehow managed to make it happen. And then I interviewed a prison guard, who is a guard for the life sentence convicts, and that was something. You cannot imagine what the prison is like in Serbia. It's terrible, and that's also a little part in my third book. You will all know what it is.
And Lisa, I know, I mean, you don't have a police officer, but you have a hero that A, is working in Beijing, B, is working in the art world, and C, is ex-military. And so what sort of, did you do research, or is it just something that you picked up on?
I made it all up, Martha.
That's what imagination is for.
Well, okay, so the art component, I was many majors when I was going to college, which is probably why I graduated with enough units for a master's degree and no degree. Among my various majors was visual arts at UCSD, and it was a contemporary art of the sort of art that is being made in Beijing. So I had that, a little bit of background, and then in Los Angeles I had a really good friend who was a gallery curator for a contemporary art gallery. So I was kind of, I wouldn't say I was involved in the contemporary art scene, but I just sort of stood on the fringes and eavesdropped a lot. And then in China, you know, I had been reading about the contemporary art scene there for quite a while, and I was fascinated by it. So early on, before I knew exactly what I was going to do with this book, I was like, I want to go see all these new hipster, you know, art, reclaimed factory spaces and art spaces that I keep hearing about. So I went around and I saw a lot of those, and I talked to some artists, and my Chinese is kind of mediocre, but it's enough to have some conversations with people, and I had some interesting conversations with artists, and, you know, really learned a lot that way. You know, a lot of research when you're setting something when you're setting something anywhere is pretty much what I think everybody has said here, that you really want to get the specific rhythms and colors and sights and sounds and smells of that place. So, you know, there's a lot of that in my books. The military thing was the hardest part for me because I don't have that experience, and I was extremely worried about taking it on because I wanted to do it justice. And, you know, I have relatives who served, so I had some resources to draw on, but mostly, you know, with the Second Iraq War, soldiers were really talking about their experiences as they were happening. There was a lot of blogging that went on. There were books that were published, and a lot of the blogging stuff was real time. You know, it was basically as this is happening, people are writing about it. And I am kind of the research by the pound mentality. I do a ton of research that isn't necessarily relevant. I don't know whether it will be or not. It's like, you know, to paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld, you don't know what you don't know. You know, so then you kind of figure out what it is that you want to talk about, and then you can go work on the specifics. So I think some of the most meaningful feedback that I have gotten has been from vets that have written to me, and you know, thanked me for what I had written, and I mean, I feel kind of, I feel uncomfortable with it because, you know, it's like I didn't experience this, and I'm only doing my best guess. And if somebody feels that I'm speaking specifically about their experiences, then I'm honored that they think that way. But it feels like this really heavy responsibility, you know. But if I can help some people, I got a letter from one woman who said that she really appreciated the book because it helped her make some sense of some things that she'd been feeling since she came back, and some experiences that she had. And all I could think was, oh my God, I hope you didn't have any of the experiences that my character had in this book. I just felt horrible, you know. So yeah, that was really hard.
Well, we've all sort of talked about, you know, how you came up with your characters and what sort of stories you're attracted to, but to do this book after book, all of you write series. And so I'd be interested in, first of all, hearing sort of what was the path that led to the publication of your first book, but then sort of what it's been like to write a series. And I'll start with Kara, since you have the most books.
Yeah, actually, this is the 16th that comes out next week. Okay, when the first book came out, that was 1999. Publishing was different, right? I mean, and it's constantly evolving and in flux. But cast your mind back, if some of you are too young for that maybe, but some of us remember, I mean, in the 90s, it was a real different world. When I was starting to write my book, there was no Dragon Tattoo, there was no Da Vinci Code, Donna Leon wasn't even published. I mean, there were no really foreign mysteries, thrillers, suspenses anyway being translated and being mainstream here. It was quite different. So I wanted to write this story about my friend's mother, who was a hidden Jewish girl during the German occupation in Paris. I did. My father was a mystery reader, and he said, you know, maybe you could tell that story through a mystery. And I listened to his advice, and I did. And because he was a great P.D. James fan. So when I read P.D. James, I realized that she also, like you, used initials, that it was, you know, it was a great way to tell a story about social issues with psychological depth and all these details. And of course, there's crime and murder. So it took me 3.5 years to write Murder in the Marais. When it was finished, my husband, who had a bookstore, said, well, you know, go look on the pages of the bookstore and see where your book would fit. Well, again, there's no Dragon Tattoo, there's no nothing, so it was very small. You know, there weren't these foreign thriller mysteries. And so but I did see some mysteries, and they all had this distinctive spine. These were Soho crime stories, who specialized in foreign locales. So I did my homework, I looked at them, and they also took unagented submissions. So I sent them a query, sent some pages, they asked for more, and then one day I got a phone call, and I was talking with a friend, and it was Soho Press saying, hi, Kara, is your book still available? We're sorry we haven't got back to you for a long time. And I said, what? And they go, is it available? I go, yeah! You want it? Yeah! I'm just like, oh, dummy. And so later people told me that I should have said, you know, excuse me, I have like Steven Spielberg on the other line, or whoever would be the equivalent today. But of course I didn't. But I was thrilled, and I was accepted by Soho Press. This took another 9 months to edit. We published it. And then my editor said, well, where's Amy going next? And I said, what? Yeah, you know, the man she met, you know, and this person, and then he's, well, you are writing another story, aren't you? You are writing a series, aren't you? And I went, of course I am, lying. So that launched me into my life of crime, okay? I had no real plan. I just went with Belleville, because I was staying there, and I slowly moved her in time, because I was in the 90s going there when I started writing. I moved her a few months ahead, you know, when everybody was recovered out of the hospital and could investigate again. And so I just slowly moved them forward. So now, 15 books, and we're only in 1999. No Facebook, as I said, you know, no Twitter, historical. But, so that's, you know, I had no intention. But now, I had to go back to 1989, which is a whole other kettle of wax. But the publishing world was really different when I started, and I don't know, you know, it's everybody's reading on so many different platforms. There's no one right way, you know,
To publish anymore.
No.
People come up with, both they publish independently, they publish on blogs, and then turn them into books. It's just a whole range of things.
right. Oh, and you were asking about series? I just tried to move the character ahead. I didn't think about, you know, her organic growth. I mean, but she did evolve. You know, it's kind of odd to be living with someone for 20 years like this.
Well, I wrote my first book, Rock, Paper, Tiger, and in spite of my, vow that I was going to write something that I could sell, it came out pretty weird. And it was actually published by Soho, but not Soho Crime. It was published by the Literary Line. And it had taken so, because I have like really amazing timing, right? My book goes out on submission just when the global economy cratered. So it was like, the book would get like up to, second editorial review board or whatever, and then they go, no, it's too risky, we don't want to do it. So the book was out on submission for a year, and I had no plans for it to be a series at all. So I wrote what I thought was going to be my second standalone, which was like, I'm going to do a fun little noir thriller set in Puerto Vallarta because that's a city I've been to a bunch of times, and I think it's got a nice noir edge to it. So I'm going to write that while this book is out on submission that may not ever sell. Anyway, then Rock, Paper, Tiger sold, and it did, better than I had expected because I had no expectations whatsoever by this point. And then the second book was acquired by Soho, also their main literary, and I don't really think of myself as a literary writer, but my stuff can kind of go either way. It's not quite. There's no such thing as traditional crime fiction. Honestly, it's such a broad area. But anyway, so the second book got acquired, and I got to write something else. And I'm going like, I could write another Ellie book. I'd love to do something dealing with China's environmental issues because it's such a big deal. So I wrote that. And then my publisher comes back to me and they go, would you consider writing a sequel to Getaway, which was my second book? And I was like, no, why would I want to do that? It was over, it was done, even though there were people that were going like, that's a cliffhanger ending. And I'm like, it's not a cliffhanger ending. It's a metaphor, goddammit.
Yes, it was.
I don't know what it was. To me, it was done, And I thought about it, and then I was like, what would really be fun would be, to take this character who was so unprepared at the beginning of that book, and then where she is at the end of the book after going through all of this series of horrible, awful, not very good events, and showing her growth and ability to navigate another situation that is still hopeless, mind you, but at least she knows what's going on. And I thought, well, that would be a fun challenge. And then talking about the prison industry and drug legalization and dark money in politics, that would be fun, so I can do that. And then meanwhile, Soho's like, well, where's the third Ellie book? And I'm like, I had an idea that was like 3 sentences on a napkin. So that was the one that ended up being completed first and published first. And I really feel, for me, I had said all along, I am not planning on writing an Ellie book every year. She is not an actual police person nor detective. It doesn't make sense for her to be in situation after situation after situation. It starts to be like, Jessica Fletcher in Murder, She Wrote. Like, don't go near this person. Bad things are going to happen to you, Or bad things kept happening to her. And you've got a troubled person to begin with. And it's like, how much more of this could she deal with and experience and endure and function? So I really felt like I gotta give her a break, man. So there's 3 books, they're done. I feel like the story is complete. I'm kind of backing off. I'm never gonna write another one of those again and going like, well, I got an idea. So maybe in a year or 2 I'll write another one. And then with this particular character, I have no idea if I'll write another one or not. I think it's basically like, for me, because I don't write easily. I'm very slow, and I find it kind of hard and not a lot of fun a lot of the time. I have to challenge myself and do something different every time. There has to be a reason for me to involve this character in another story, and if there isn't, it's just too much work for me. It's too much work for me no matter what it is. So it's like, if that's going to be the case, then I need to do something that challenges and entertains myself, because there ain't nothing else that's going to keep me going through it, because it's not like I'm a millionaire doing this, So it's got to be because it's a creative expression that I enjoy.
Very nice. How about you, Pat?
Well, I feel that my path to be published, and it has been like a miracle. Like, here I am in California, in this beautiful town, Berkeley. It's really a miracle. I told you already that I took a Sabbath year from my work, so I had 1 year time to write what I wanted to write. And when I was writing The Hummingbird, I didn't much think about publishing. Actually, I didn't think it at all. My only goal was to show myself that I can finish a novel. I can write it from the beginning to the end, because I had started so many before, and I don't know, I wrote maybe 10 or 20 or 30 pages, and that was that. I never was able to finish them. And this time I thought that now this is my only chance. Now I have to do it. And then I did it. I sent it to the publisher. We don't have agents in Finland. We approached directly the publishing houses, and within 3 weeks, Otava, my publisher in Finland, contacted me and said that this is good, we want to do this. And I was like, what? Wow. And I didn't have idea for writing series like in the beginning, but when I was writing The Hummingbird, I started to get new ideas like, I could write about this and I could write about that, and so it kind of just, it happened to come into series. And I think that I will continue writing about Anna Fagata as long as I have something to say through her character. And when I don't have it anymore, it's time to do something else. I won't keep it going like by force or something like that.
Yeah. I'll open up for questions in a second, but let's hear about Terry's path.
I wrote 7 books before I could get one published, and that turns out to be the average. So I went to a workshop with a woman named Sophie Littlefield, who gave this impassioned speech at the end of the workshop, and she said, if you want to be published, dig deep inside and find what you can write and no one else can write. And I went home and I was working on something else entirely, and I just put it down. After about a month, it took about a month, and I said, I'm going back to write about Jarrett Creek, which is a book, which is a community I had thought up in college, and I had literary short stories published that were based on this town. And I said, go back there, you know that town, you know those people, you know it deep down inside. The first book, and everyone always hates me when they hear this, took me 2 months to write. That's it. I sat down and it poured out of me. I got up at 6 o'clock every single morning and worked for 4 hours. Bam! 2 months it was done. I gave it to my writers group and they all said, oh my God, this is totally the best ever. I did a few revisions, sent it off, and it took 2 years to find a publishing home. So that's the state of publishing when I was there, when I started out. Right after this happened, right after I wrote the book, and I was so excited, I went to a conference, and I asked the question of an editor of a big house there, and I said, you know, I've written this book about Texas, and he went on a 5-minute, I kid you not, tirade about how books from Texas would never sell. They were absolutely horrible. Why would I think of that? Go home and write something else. I was almost in tears at the end. Some woman next to me who didn't know me just reached over and clutched my hand. She said, I'm so sorry. So at any rate, I finally got the call from my agent who said, yes, we have gotten a really nice offer from 7th Street Books. And I promptly went upstairs. Everybody is a slob who's a writer, okay? I promptly went upstairs, got dressed, and put on makeup. I said, now I'm professional.
Very nice. Thank you all. We're now going to open things up for questioning. Actually, the woman, black and white shirt. Yes.
I was wondering if you all could speak to ways that you craft tension in your novels and ways that you create compelling mysteries.
So the question was, how do they craft tension in their novels, and how do they create compelling mysteries? Anybody just open it up?
Well, I think in a story, it's basically about characters who want something, right? A character wants something, and they are with someone, another character, who either wants the same thing or wants to stop them. So it's like 2 dogs going for a bone, whatever that will. You've got to have tension. People need to have, I approach it different agendas. It could be, you know, that I want a glass of water and Lisa's, you know, in my way or something. It doesn't have to be a major, but it's about characters who want something, who reach obstacles and have to surmount them, so that we want to be involved. You know, we care. Maybe they're unsympathetic characters, but we have to empathize with them in some way or root for them to go on their journey. It's about being, when we were cave people and people went out to hunt and brought the food home, the animal home, and we sat around and we ate it. You had to be a good storyteller to keep people awake and talk about your hunt or whatever, engaging. And so I think I just started talking like that. But I think it's about people wanting something and having problems to trying to achieve it.
Yeah.
And
It's about conflict, exactly what Kara said. You have characters with conflicting goals a lot of the times, or, and aside from that, there's just a lot of technical tricks, language, use of rhythm in language. And another thing that you really want to do is you think of each chapter as kind of like a little miniature story.
Mm-hmm.
And you both want the chapter to settle something, but it also has to give you a reason to turn the page. And I can't tell you the number of books that I've read where it was something like, she knew that her assistant liked to have milk with her coffee, so she brought her a cup of coffee with milk. And that's the end of the chapter. That doesn't really work.
This kind of basic question, how do you plot out your book? You've got an idea, do you do like little 3x5 cards? Do you get a big whiteboard and write out your chapters?
So the question is, how do they plot out their books? Do they have any techniques?
If I start now, I have some kind of idea in the beginning, and I have a slight idea about ending, but how to go from the beginning to the end, I don't know it before I start to write. I don't plan it very much. I try always to plan. I want to be organized and whatever, but I never succeed in that. But now I have kind of accepted that, okay, it's my way to do it. Just start to write, and then the things will, I hope so, at least so far I have managed to do it, and that's my plotting. At some point I have like millions of little papers all over the house.
My version of plotting is I start writing, and I write about probably 20,000 words, and then all of a sudden I say, if you don't figure out a general direction for this, you're going to write yourself in a corner, which I've been known to do. So that's what I usually do is, I can't say I plot it, but I'll put a few sentences saying, okay, this has to happen somewhere along the line, this has to happen in order to get to where I want it to go. So that's, I don't do any particular plotting, but like Kati, I often have little notes everywhere, and I find them later after I've sent the book off and saying, oh, well, that sounds like a good idea, why did I not do that?
Sir?
Miss Kati, your book, Exile, will be coming out in October. What relationship do you have with your translation? Because you speak English, Lisa speaks Mandarin, Cara speaks French.
Io parlo italiano.
You
speak Texan, girl.
Yeah, I was going to say, she speaks
I sure do, honey.
I think translation it's another profession. It's not my profession. I'm a storyteller. I'm not a translator. I couldn't translate my text or anybody else's text. No way. My English is not that good. And you know, when you are finished with the book, at least I'm not very interested in it anymore. I couldn't spend another year doing the translation with it. And I'm very lucky to have an excellent English translator, David Haxton. All credits to him. We don't have many in Finland who can really do a good job. I think we have 2 good English translators, and David is the other one. And my books have been translated into 9 languages so far. I cannot read them all, so I just have to trust, and I do trust.
Sir?
Yeah, this question is really aimed towards, it's based on something that Kara said, but any of you that want to jump in, you mentioned that she's a computer security expert. And the question I have for you is, when it comes to technical aspects, how bound up do you get in them? Because I've seen people trip over this stuff, and then I've noticed that in the Millennium series, it's like a lot of magic. You know, the hacker does the hacking, and all of a sudden, you know, every computer in the world is available for them to look at. How do you, is the technical stuff something that you know, theoretically spend a lot of time on, or is it just something you gloss over?
So he's asking Kara about how she manages to weave the technical aspects in, balancing it within the book, as well as doing research so that it's believable.
Right. Well, my first book is in 1993, and the latest book is 99. So that was a different world. Google was still in the garage right down near Palo Alto. Okay, we did not have Google. We remember listservs and message boards. Okay, so it was a different world. People had cell phones. So, but it doesn't mean that this wasn't a precursor, because, and I'll try to make this really short, but Google Maps, okay, where did that come from? That came from somebody noodling around in his mother's kitchen or in the shed about trying these different things. And that was maybe 10 years before, and before these people got together, Google then became big and got enough money to buy companies and, you know, to expand it. So there's a lot of this technology, like GPS at the time was only used, in my books, was only used by the French military. Now we all have it on our phones. But that was that era. Doesn't mean the technology wasn't there, and they even had flat screen TVs in the 90s, but they were like $30,000, okay? So these were not consumer items at that time, but the technology was emerging or in startups before they were bought by Google or whoever. So that it does exist, but frankly, my neighbor up the street is French, and he worked in France as a programmer in the 90s. So I will run something by him. He'll go, no, Renee has to do dial-up here, you forgot. So, and I don't want to pull people too much to go, oh, but I can get GPS now. It's to kind of suggest that this is the way it was, to remind us. And I don't want to bog you down with, was there a Wired magazine in 97 or did it start in 98? And I do get those emails. But I don't want to pull you so closely that you're worried about it, but I have to do service to it, and we're all so savvy now. It's to remind you, yes, you know, we could not smoke in the we could smoke in the cafes in Paris, you know, and now you can't. And so my thing is bringing it back to people who are savvy readers of today to remind you and not get you stuck. Do you know what I mean? Stuck up in these minutiae. So more broad stroking in some areas.
Well, there's so much that we don't know. There's so many things that we can't all know about everything. And so it's important, I think, that the characters seem to know it and that they convince us. I mean, I've read The Martian. You know, I can't read every little detail of that because I am not that, you know, I'm good at math, but I'm not that good at math, and I'm not good at physics. But I believed that he knew that. I'm reading another book right now that's a cyber thriller, and he is giving a little too much information about it. It's not interesting. I just want to know that he knows it. I don't have to know the details of it. So I think it's really caught up in writing it well enough, you know,
to make it believable, like Tom Clancy thrillers. I mean, I kind of glaze over them, but I think, okay, it's Tom. I'll just take it. I'll just buy it and I'll move on 3 pages, you know. But yeah, you want to give the authority.
Yes.
And move on.
We have time for one more question. Any last questions? No? Okay, well, oh yeah.
I really appreciate that you guys talked about research. What kind, do you have a way of compensating the people that help you with your research?
So the question was whether we have a way of compensating the people that help us with the research. Anybody want to?
Take them out for a beer, you know. I thank people in acknowledgements who help me generally.
I buy the French police wine.
So we're saying booze.
I give them my books if they want. I find them in the end of the book, and they would be offended if I would offer them money or something. It would be like,
Yeah.
Okay. That's it. Thank you all so much for coming.